Hello and welcome to another Switzer CEO Masterclass, and today I'm talking to Geoff Ward, who's the CEO of the Hazer Group, a company involved in alternative fuel, in a sense, in hydrogen. Geoff, thanks for coming to the program.
Thank you, Peter.
So let's tell us about the Hazer Group.
All right, so Heiser is a clean technology company and we're commercialising the Heiser process, which is a new way of producing hydrogen and graphite. So we take a gas feedstock, methane or biomethane, and we produce hydrogen and a solid graphite product rather than hydrogen and CO2 as current production methods produce.
Okay, so you're using a biofuel. Explain what that is.
Oh, well, biogas is methane, the same molecule as in natural gas, but it's come from a biological source, an organic source. Yeah. So it's gas that comes from landfill, wastewater treatment plants, or the disposal and treatment of agricultural waste. So it's gas that comes from breaking down carbon that's part of our natural carbon cycle. So it's a truly renewable gas.
Okay, and so you're getting hydrogen out of it, which kind of makes sense. A lot of people would be saying, where does the graphite come from?
Well, methane, from our year 9, year 10 chemistry is CH4.
Yeah, but you understood it. We didn't, but go on.
It's made up of one carbon molecule and 4 hydrogens.
Yeah.
Our process, we separate the hydrogens and the carbons, as happens in other production techniques. But we produce hydrogen plus a solid graphite particle rather than hydrogen plus a gaseous CO2, as in other technologies.
So the leftover bit is effectively graphite?
Is a graphite product that we think will have value in the 21st century, in the battery markets, in lubricant markets, as a water treatment chemical, or as a component of advanced building materials.
They even use graphite on tennis rackets, don't they, nowadays?
Well, tennis rackets and sporting goods, but I'm not sure that's a huge market.
Okay, so where does the hydrogen sit amongst other renewable resources?
Right. So there's been a lot of talk about the hydrogen economy, or when I work in Japan, they charmingly refer to it as the hydrogen society. Oh. And what hydrogen allows you to do is store, transport and use renewable energy when and where you need it. So it's really could be considered as renewables 2.0 if you want to use a cliche. So what hydrogen will allow us to do is to really take full advantage of the abundant and plummeting cost of wind and solar power. Up till now we've put it into the grid, and at 1% and 5% and 10% and even 20 and 25 and 30%, we've been able to just push more renewables into the grid. But gradually we get to a point where the grid is constrained or it's not matching supply and demand. Now hydrogen will allow us to integrate more renewables in the grid, because you can take renewable energy, turn it to hydrogen, and then turn that back to energy when you need it without producing any CO2. It will allow us to provide grid resilience and storage services, these famous frequency control and other services. And it also acts as a direct replacement for diesel in heavy transport, and can be a low emission feedstock to reduce the emissions of intensive industries like ammonia or petrochemicals.
So you're saying that trucks that are currently being driven on diesel could be converted to be driven by hydrogen?
Absolutely. So hydrogen fuel cell trucks exist around the world, as do hydrogen fuel cell ferries, buses, trains. They're a really emerging market sector, being driven by companies like Hyundai, Toyota, large truck manufacturers. So a hydrogen fuel cell truck is an electric truck, but it makes its electric power on demand from hydrogen as a fuel rather than drawing it out from a pre-stored battery. So the industry believes that heavy vehicles will be really well suited to hydrogen because they have long range, they can be refueled quickly, and you carry your own fuel on board.
So why is the global hydrogen economy only coming to light now, considering all those great pluses you just talked about?
Well, someone once said that every overnight success has 30 years of hard work behind it. So it's a bit like saying, why did solar only become an overnight sensation in about 2010? When of course we were working on it right back to the Apollo program for the solar panels to power the Apollo modules in the 70s. And so we actually have a very large hydrogen industry. We use it in making ammonia, in making fertilisers, in making explosives, in desulfurising fuels in refineries. So there's been a lot of advances in hydrogen tanks, storage, valving, etc. Similarly, with the push to electric vehicles, we're now seeing more mature hydrogen type vehicles. But most importantly, it's been the plunging cost of wind and solar, because now that renewable energy is very cheap, it actually offers a potential for clean hydrogen, hydrogen that doesn't produce CO2, made by electrolysis, so splitting water atoms to hydrogen and oxygen, to actually act as a very, very large fuel source in the future. And Japan believes that they will replace LNG imports with hydrogen imports by the middle of the century. Now that opens up the door for technologies like ours to work alongside that deep hydrogen economy. So it's a factor of low cost renewables, maturity of technology, and now we're focusing on the difficult to abate sections of our economy for emissions reduction.
Okay, walk us down the timetable. How long do you think before hydrogen is going to become a really important part for moving cars and creating energy for cities? How long do you reckon that?
Well, it's technically feasible now, and all the components of that hydrogen supply chain are primarily manufactured components. So I think it's very reasonable to assume that prices will drop very quickly the way they have for wind and solar. So we've seen something like a 95% drop in the cost of wind and solar power over the last 15 to 20 years. Really an inconceivable number. And we think there's the potential for that again in hydrogen. So it's not 2 to 3 years away, but it's certainly within the sort of the 4 to 7 year window in my view. That we're seeing a big focus now in Australia and in emerging premium markets in Asia, California, Northern Europe of our larger scale demonstration projects, which are starting to build the supply chains. And if we use the solar and wind industry as a proxy, once those supply chains start to get some volume, then prices will drop very quickly and uptake rises.
So the viability of it becoming a real player in helping transport and energy will be a function of its costs. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to get out of using fossil fuels, the alternatives have to be relatively similar in cost before, unless there's a government pressure and a tax if you don't actually do it. But do you think within that time frame it will be able to do it, and will it provide the base load capacity that cities and countries need?
So I think certainly within this decade, hydrogen will be very cost competitive. And it absolutely addresses that issue of how do you have energy when you need it, how you need it. And that's because of the flexibility I talked about earlier, that it can help bring more renewables into the grid and stabilise that. It's also a form of electrification of transport. It's also a component or a product in its own right for industry. So because it can do all of those things, it addresses that variability issue. I think the big issue will be stimulating demand and uptake. So like we saw with the renewable energy target and housetop solar incentive schemes, once we created customer demand that brought volume, then prices came down very quickly. And I think as a sort of a manufactured product, hydrogen is produced through equipment, not through a resource. I think there's every reason to believe that we'll follow that same kind of precipitous cost decline, driven by Chinese manufacturing, economies of scale and incremental improvement in design.
Okay. Does Australia have a competitive advantage in hydrogen?
Thankfully, we have an enormous competitive advantage in hydrogen.
Why?
The hydrogen of the future is assumed to be low carbon, because there's no point in doing this if it's not low carbon. And so the method for low carbon hydrogen is primarily going to be the use of electrolysis, so using water to produce hydrogen. And then there's complementary technologies like ours, where we use waste gas and bioresources, or we also can use natural gas and we capture the carbon. So there's a range of low carbon ways of making hydrogen. Australia has great wind and great solar. We're the envy of North Asia in that perspective. So as an example, the Japanese government through their department MITI, the Ministry of Industry, Energy, Technology and Innovation.
They're great acronyms, aren't they?
They are. But those don't change very often. This was the same department that studied the gas industry in the 70s. It's identified Australia as the best positioned country to supply hydrogen to places like Japan and Korea long term. And that's because we can produce wind and solar energy so cheaply, because we have a really strong industrial workforce that's capable of running large energy projects, and because we've got a great track record as an exporter and partner over many decades.
So is the vision that you're actually describing that we use wind and solar to power the process to create the hydrogen, and then the hydrogen is then used as the power source?
Correct, or as a complementary power source.
Put them all together, you've got three.
And then you have where we fit in, just to probably bring it back for our investors, is that what we see is that we offer a great opportunity to produce hydrogen locally in these markets. So we can front run imports, because you need a big market for imports. So we think that we can position ourselves to produce locally in a low carbon way close to customers.
Okay, so tell us what Heiser actually does. Just describe the business of Heiser.
Business, right. So our technology takes gas, whether it's natural gas or whether it's biogas, which is our main focus now, and produces hydrogen and graphite.
Yeah.
So we will design...
In a factory of some kind?
We will look like a gas plant. We will look like a small LPG plant, to the sort of average citizen driving past. We'll just look like another piece of gas processing infrastructure. So we'll look like a small refinery or epoxy resin plant.
Yeah.
So we will produce hydrogen to sell to customers who either want to use it as a low carbon input into industry. Our first primary market is to the transport market, because we see that as the highest value and the one which is break even the earliest.
Yeah.
And we'll also sell and market graphite as a valuable byproduct, either directly as ourselves or through our partnership with Mineral Resources. We could license the technology to companies who want to integrate it with their existing facilities. We could do build, own, operate, where we operate a plant, sell the hydrogen under contract and market the other products, or a hybrid model of them both through joint venture or partnerships.
And where are you at now? Are you producing hydrogen and selling hydrogen, or if not, what's the time?
We are still in the commercialisation path. Yeah. So our technology originated in the University of Western Australia, and we've now subsequently got a partnership with the University of Sydney. So if you think of technology development, where there was primary research, then there was bench scale and laboratory phase. Through 2017 to early to 2019, we did an extensive pilot program. We have 2 pilot plants located in Kwinana, south of Perth, one owned by ourselves, one owned by Mineral Resources. And we're now going through the design, financing and completing the agreements to commit to the first larger scale Hazer plant. We're calling that the commercial demonstration plant. Yep. It's going to be located on the wastewater treatment facility owned by Water Corporation. Water Corp are responsible for the drinking water, sewerage and drainage services in Western Australia. Yep. We have an MOU with them to collaborate on building this first of its type plant on their site. We will buy biogas from them and they will host the plant at their facility. All things going well, we hope to be in construction in the next couple of months. We're just finalising all of the design, budget and costings as we speak. Yep. And our target is for that plant to be up and running at the end of first quarter next year. So 12 months from now, we should be in production of the first operating Hazer facility. Okay. And will that stuff be sold, or we just to prove how you can do it? No, we have an offtake agreement with BOC Limited. So we have a non-binding term sheet. BOC are one of the major industrial gas companies globally. They're part of Linde Group, and they're a major player in sort of the supply distribution of hydrogen. So we have an offtake term sheet with BOC, so the gas will be sold. The plant is a demonstration scale. It's not a fully economic size. At 100 tonnes per annum of hydrogen, it'd be enough to run about a 10-bus fleet. So a good demonstration size. Okay, great stuff. Well, we look forward to that. Is there anything else you think an investor should know about the company? Oh, we think that the message that I give investors, both big and small, is that the hydrogen transition is definitively real, and it will be real the way the wind and solar investment is. So we're now in the first couple of years of a multi-decade investment cycle, which will see hydrogen, renewables, storage, smart grids more and more become the predominant energy vector, and hydrogen allows you to support a high energy, high intensity industrial economy fully off those resources. So this is the start of a many decade investment wave. Okay, well good luck with it. Sounds great. That's Geoff Ward, the CEO of Hazer Group.